When exploring deep space aboard a spelljamming ship, one is bound to find themselves in the middle of a battle at some point. GameMasters here, and we are going to explore how ship-to-ship and even how ship-to-monster battles work in the new Spelljammer setting. And here's a big spoiler. It's really not terribly difficult to learn, and it's not overly complex in calculating what happens. However, I will admit that the terms can get a little confusing. We have Spelljammer, the setting itself. We have the Spelljammer helm, which is the device used to control a ship. We have a Spelljammer, a generic term for the ships themselves. We have the Spelljammer, that's the term given to the individual sitting in the helm's chair and can steer the ship, also referred to as the pilot. And in the old Advanced Dungeons & Dragons version, there was even a ship with the specific name of Spelljammer, but as best I can tell, it's not referenced in any of the new 5th edition Spelljamming books. Then we have the term spelljamming, and this is essentially the action of flying through space and everything that entails. To see how battles work, we first need to check out exactly how spelljamming works. Here, you can see that it has a gravity plane. Each ship has one, and each ship also has an air envelope. Keep those two elements in mind. We're going to revisit them in a moment. A spelljamming ship can cruise through space going roughly 100 million miles in every 24 hours. The Spelljamming helm, the method in which the ship is steered, makes minor course corrections to keep it from colliding with various things one might find in space, such as asteroids, other ships, space-dwelling creatures, stuff like that. These course adjustments are made automatically, and when a ship traveling like this gets too close to another object, it will automatically slow down. The Spelljammer, and I'm referring to the one sitting in the chair, the pilot, is usually the first one to detect when the ship is slowing down. The book describes this sensation as being similar to when your foot falls asleep, pins and needles, and the Spelljammer can kind of feel the difference between different objects. That pins and needles sensation may be more intense, for example, if an asteroid were present, or slightly intense, slightly less intense, if they were to approach another Spelljammer ship. Or it might be wildly painful with bouts of pins and needles if, for example, they were to approach a star that had a solar dragon living inside. Each ship can have multiple Spelljammer helms on board. However, only one can be used to operate the ship. If someone attempts to take control by making use of a second helm, then a duel of sorts takes place, with each Spelljammer, again the one sitting in the chair, making a constitution roll. The winner takes over control of the ship. And I can really see this being as a crafty way to board a ship, an enemy ship, and cast the spell Create Spelljammer Helm in an attempt to take it over. You just better have a good backup plan, because it's a really good bet that the crew may come down to eradicate the new would-be pilot. A bit ago, we talked about gravity planes. Each ship has one and runs generally through the center of the object. Even asteroids have them, and obviously so do massive planets. Without going into a long-winded metaphysics dissertation, I'm going to just stick to the spelljamming ships here. It is the gravity plane that keeps the folks on the ships from just kind of free-floating into space. Although if the ship is damaged badly enough, that could very well potentially happen. Because the ships have a gravity plane, they also have what is called an air envelope. In essence, the gravity pulls in air, providing an envelope of breathable air. Even if, for various reasons, someone were to be ejected into space, they too would have a small air envelope that would allow them to survive for a brief moment. It is their size that would determine their personal air envelope size, and they will generally have about 1 minute of breathable air before it is exhausted. The size of the air envelope is determined by the overall size of the ship or the object itself. The air envelope surrounding any given ship, assuming it has an average sized crew, will last roughly 120 days. Then it will turn into foul air, which is a little more difficult to breathe, and that will last roughly 120 days. Then it will turn into deadly air, causing those on board to suffocate. Entering a planet's atmosphere or an asteroid whose air envelope is large enough can replenish the ship's air envelope. There are even some ships called living ships that have incorporated a massive tree on its deck that will replenish the ship's air automatically. And I found one ship that has the special ability that says, if you're enjoying this video, to please give it a thumbs up, as it really helps me to reach more eyes and improves with that YouTube algorithm. Okay, I just made that thumbs up ship up, but I thank you just the same. So we have the basics covered. There are more details about both gravity planes as well as air envelopes in the book, but what we've covered are the essentials needed for understanding how ship-to-ship combat works. Each Spelljammer ship has a crew, and the pilot on board will feel when the ship approaches a potential threat, then their ship will begin to automatically slow down. A battle is about to begin. We are going to use the bombard ship as the example here. And at the bottom, you can see its gravity plane, and up here on top, you can see that it has two ballistas, and the front of it looks kind of like a dragon's open mouth. That's a giant cannon. When the ship slows down automatically due to it being in close proximity of another ship, the Dungeon Master will roll on this table to determine the distance. It could be 250 feet, 500 feet, or 1,000 feet as to where it stops. And this is important because some armaments have different reaches. Well, and the crew members about to go into battle also have ranges that their weapons will kind of eventually become useless at. Yeah, you may have a marksman hunter that is aces with his arrows, but that's going to do you very little good when you're trying to do a called shot at 1,000 feet away. The DM then has the ships roll for initiative, and the book suggests using the side initiative roll, which in this instance is a flat d20 roll per ship, as opposed to making an individual roll per entity aboard each ship. It may come down to individual initiative rolls should the ships collide and one crew boards the other in a melee battle. Once the ship has slowed down, the pilot can maneuver the ship and can determine if they want to get closer or farther away, or they can just move the ship to broadside to the opposing ship for ramming speed. If one Spelljammer ship is within 5 feet of another, creatures can move back and forth, although there could potentially be other means of crossing over. Teleporting could be one possible way. So I just mentioned ramming speed, and we've all seen the movies where one ship on the open sea positions itself to run headlong into another. It's even happened in Star Trek, and it can happen in Spelljammer too. You just better be sure the ship that you're using to ram with can withstand that collision. This is a special attack, and to determine if it hits, the pilot would roll a d20 and add their Constitution modifier against the target's armor class. Again, we are using the Bombard as an example, so we'll look at its summary stats, and we can see that it has an armor class of 15. It is possible, too, that both ships in the ram collision will take bludgeoning damage, as seen here in the crash damage table. The amount of damage taken is based on the size of the thing that was struck. Some ships are better suited for ramming than others. The Bombard, being made mostly of wood, is probably one I'd want to avoid ramming with. The Scorpion ship, however, just look at this thing. It's made mostly of metal with two massive claws that this thing could rip apart any ship made out of wood in no time. Different ships have different weapons. We pointed out that the Bombard has ballistae and a cannon, with the cannon able to dish out 16d10 bludgeoning damage. Now that Scorpion ship we talked about, for example, has a mangonel that can do 5d10 bludgeoning damage. And it's easy to see that the Bombard could dish out more damage, but where the Scorpion ship has the advantage is in its two claws. And this thing was really designed for up-close combat. The claws can do 2d10 bludgeoning damage, but on top of that, the ship that it clawed, it's grappled and cannot move away and will take an additional 2d10 damage at the start of each of its turns. While the potential 160 damage from the Bombard's cannon is awesome, it's rendered useless. So for example, if it's pointing this way and the Scorpion ship grabs it this way, I can't shoot that ship. When two ships are side by side, or are otherwise super close, their gravity planes can overlap. And what's worse is when they overlap at different angles, like that. To keep from being overly complex, the rules state that the ship with the highest hit points takes over as the main gravity plane. From this point, if one crew moves over from one ship to the other, combat ensues as it would anywhere else. Each individual rolls for initiative and combat happens. But let's assume for a moment that the Bombard breaks free from the Scorpion's claws and puts a little distance between them. Still close enough for that sorcerer to toss a fireball, still close enough for that ranger to shoot an arrow, but far enough away so that the gravity planes and air envelopes do not overlap. In other words, there is a void of space between your ship and the enemy ship. What happens? Well, Shooting an arrow with enough momentum, it should be able to make it to the intended target. Well, assuming that you rolled well enough to actually hit. And the gravity-less void of space would have little bearing on that arrow's path. Even casting a fireball and tossing it to the other ship would make it. Yep, magical fire can survive in the void of space, although it would not be able to ignite anything until it was within the other ship's air envelope. Tossing a lit torch, however, would instantly see it snuffed out the moment it left your ship's air envelope and hit the void of space. There's no air, there's no oxygen for it to stay lit. In some instances, you may also find yourself fighting in a gravity-absent area. The impeded melee rule takes this into account. When you make a melee attack with a weapon, a creature that doesn't have flying or swimming speed has disadvantage on the attack roll unless the weapon has piercing damage. Now, I'm not terribly sure that I understand what piercing damage has to do with it, unless the act of thrusting the weapon into something provides leverage and grip, because it also states a creature can use an action to push off something heavier than itself and move up to its walking, flying, or swimming speed in a straight line. Using Newton's first law of motion, for example, an object in motion, you, stays in motion with the same speed and in the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Going into battle against space-dwelling creatures is always going to be risky. In many instances, they can outmaneuver any spelljamming ship, and there are several that specifically go after those ships in a good old-fashioned hunt. Space can be a dangerous place for adventurers, but the rewards can also be pretty sweet. Combat is going to vary from creature to creature, and different ones will demand the use of different tactics. Some space-dwelling creatures move quite slowly and are easy to target, while others will dart around, making it rather difficult to put your sights on. Other than that, combat with space creatures happens in pretty much the same way fighting other ships does. Initiative is rolled, and choices are made. Once combat has ended, either both ships are totally destroyed, and this is the real risk, so tread into space combat with a very hesitant mind, lest you find yourself floating in the voids of wild space. Or, if you are the victor, there is a good chance that there will be damage to your ship. Well, if it's been destroyed, doing ship repairs won't help, but if you won the battle, you can repair the damage at a rate of 1 hit point per day, or you can cast Mending and restore 1d8 plus the spellcaster's spellcasting ability modifier in hit points. Likewise, there are other methods of being able to repair your ship as the DM allows, but they're not really detailed in the book and will likely require the ship to be in an area like a port, perhaps, where proper tools are present, perhaps at the Rock of Brawl. After a hard day's battle, sometimes doing a little astral fishing is exactly what is needed. While you can't fish when the ship is cruising at its spelljamming speed, you can fish when the ship is cruising at its, well, cruising speed. At the end of each hour spent fishing, you can make a DC 15 wisdom check, a survival check, and on a success, you can roll a d10 on this chart to determine what you caught. Just be aware that not everything you catch will be happy about being caught. While it does not specify in this Spelljammer book, and I'll admit the rules for Spelljammer battles is very basic, if you would like some slightly more advanced options, check out the Ships in Combat section in the D&D Ghosts of Saltmarsh book. While those were designed with ship-to-ship combat on the open sea, there's really nothing to stop you from using them in the astral sea. What's more, I'm really surprised that there are no Spelljammer rules in here to take into account altitude. I envision the battle scene towards the end of Star Trek II's Wrath of Khan, where the Enterprise is up against the Reliant, and there were several key moments where one was significantly higher up in altitude than the other. Only in some instances were they on the same level plane. But I suppose that could cause combat to slow down a touch, although I'm sure someone out there will be crafty enough to make up a good XYZ coordinate-based advanced combat system to use with this. But I think that's probably the point. They wanted the ship-to-ship combat to happen with relative quick ease, so as to kind of help keep the adventure moving along. Earlier in the video, we talked about how the Spelljammer, the pilot, can have different sensations, feelings, when the ship gets close to asteroids, other ships, and even the solar dragon that is living in the middle of a star. If you'd like to see an in-depth look at the solar dragon, check out this video. What do you think about space combat in Spelljammer? Can you approve upon it, or is it just right? Let me know in the comments below, and until next our paths cross, May you not fish up a hostile space eel.